This is what if Deku had sun breathing. So let's not waste any more time and let's get right into it. Okay, so we're gonna start off our what if with Deku going to the quirk doctor, just like in canon. As he gets there, the quirk doctor explains that Izuku has a quirk. As he starts to explain Izuku's quirk, telling him that he has a harder skull than normal people, and his sense of smell is better, and he has this breathing ability, so he can basically breathe better than other people. As the quirk doctor continues, telling Izuku that it's basically like not having a quirk. As Izuku's smile fades away as he drops his All Might toy. As his mom looks sad and picked up the All Might toy with her levitation. As she gave it to Izuku, the quirk doctor continued telling Izuku that he couldn't become a good hero with this quirk, and that he should become a police officer or a firefighter. As Izuku goes home that day, he goes into his room and starts watching the All Might video. As he starts crying, realizing that he can't become a hero. As Izuku is crying, his mom walks into the room and sees Izuku crying, as she runs up to Izuku and hugs him. As Izuku asks his mom a question, he asks his mom if he could ever become a hero. As his mom looks at Izuku and tells Izuku that there's one way, but she doesn't want him to do it. As Izuku looks at his mom with a glimmer of hope, asking his mom to tell him and that he wants to do it, he wants to become a hero. As her mom relents and tells Izuku that they need to go meet up with their grandfather. As Izuku's never met his grandfather in his life. As Inko cut off all connections with her dad. As Inko starts to explain, telling Izuku that her grandfather is very strict, and that he wanted Inko to train her whole life to inherit his techniques. But Inko ran away, meeting Hisashi and marrying him, as she forgot the ways that her father taught him. As Izuku was still very determined and asked Inko to take him there. As Inko sighed and told Izuku that they should start packing. As they all start packing, Inko tells Izuku one more time that he's very strict and ruthless, and that he's not gonna be kind. As Izuku sighs, telling his mom that if this is the only way that he can become a hero, that he's going to do it. As his mom looks at Izuku, smiling. As both Inko and Izuku travel up on top of a mountain, they get to a small cabin. As Inko walks out, she asks Izuku if he's able to breathe. As Izuku's still unfazed and tells his mom that he's fine, as Inko's having a hard time breathing. As Inko knocks on the door, an old man walks out, as she asks Inko why she's here. As Inko starts to explain to her father that Izuku has this quirk but it's not that useful, and that he wanted to come train with you so he can become a hero. As Izuku, who is hiding behind his mom, steps out a bit, as his grandfather sees him with a mark on his head. As his grandfather grabs Izuku and closes the door. As Inko is just startled by this, she knocks on the door aggressively. As her father opens the door, telling Inko that she's welcome to visit Izuku, but she's not welcome to stay. As Inko is just shocked hearing this from her father, as she walks back to the car, gloomy. As Izuku starts yelling out to his mom, as he wants his mom back. But then, his grandfather just smacks him on his head and tells Izuku to come and sit down. As Izuku sits next to a table, his grandfather starts pouring tea for Izuku. As his grandfather asks a question, he asks Izuku what the mark on his head is. As Izuku starts to explain, telling his grandfather that it's just a birthmark. As his grandfather smirks, telling Izuku to stand up. As Izuku listens to his grandfather and stands up on the other side of the room. As his grandfather tells him to take the deepest breath in that he's ever taken. As Izuku does this, he feels an overflowing amount of energy overtake him. As his grandfather tells Izuku to rush at him and punch him. As Izuku's hesitant at first, but his grandfather yells at him again as Izuku rushes at his grandfather and punches him straight in the stomach. As his grandfather stumbles back a bit, but he was still very sturdy. As Izuku holds his hand as his hand hurts. As his grandfather tells Izuku that he did a good job. As for the next 5 years, Izuku's learned all the sword styles and all the breathing styles. As Izuku's learned a special sword style called Moonlight Sword Style, where he can just use his hands to cut things. as Izuku is mostly intrigued by this style, as he uses this style instead of his regular sword, but he's also kept up with his regular sword training. But one day, his grandfather told him to follow him, as Izuku started following his grandfather as he asked him where they're going, as his grandfather tells Izuku to be patient. As they get there, there's a huge boulder in the middle of the place, as his grandfather tells Izuku that he needs to use moonlight sword style to cut the boulder in half, as Izuku looks at the boulder, confused in how he's supposed to break it. As his grandfather leaves, he tells Izuku that he has 1 year's time to break the boulder in half, or he's not allowed to return home and that he's not going to be training him anymore. As Izuku's eyes widen, knowing that there's no point in arguing with his grandfather, as he immediately starts trying to cut the boulder in half. As a few months pass, Izuku's been training and he's only able to chip off a few pieces off the boulder, as the boulder hasn't budged one bit. As one day, as Izuku has passed out from a lot of training, as he wakes up to see someone sitting on the boulder. As he looks at the person, he sees that person wearing a cat mask. As Izuku's confused who he is, as he asks the person who he is. As the person turns around and sees Izuku, as the person takes off the mask and tells Izuku that he's Tanjiro. As Izuku says it's nice to meet him, as Izuku notices that they both have the same scar on their head. As Izuku points this out, Tanjiro laughs, as Izuku wonders why Tanjiro's laughing. As Tanjiro laughs, telling Izuku it might just be because they've been trained by the same person. As Izuku asks if he's been trained by his grandfather. As Tanjiro nods, chuckling to himself. As Tanjiro jumps off the boulder, telling Izuku that he's been sent here to train him. As Izuku's stunned, for the next several months, Tanjiro starts training Izuku, as Izuku's never been able to touch Tanjiro even once. As the last day of training comes, Izuku still hasn't been able to touch Tanjiro once, as Izuku falls to the ground, punching the ground. As Izuku asks Tanjiro why he's been unable to hit him. As Tanjiro looks up into the moonlit sky, telling Izuku it's probably because he doesn't believe in himself. As Izuku looked up at Tanjiro with his eyes wide, as Izuku told Tanjiro that this might be true. As Izuku got up and told Tanjiro that he wanted to spar one more time. As Tanjiro smiled and put on his mask. As they both started sparring, Izuku hit Tanjiro straight in the head, breaking his mask. As the mask falls off, Izuku sees that Tanjiro is smiling. As Tanjiro fades, Izuku notices that he sliced the boulder in half. Izuku was confused what was going on as he walked back to the cabin where his grandfather was. As he opens the door, he sees that his grandfather is sipping on some tea. As he sits down next to him and asks his grandfather if Tanjiro was ever his disciple. As his grandfather was confused, he asked who Tanjiro was. As his grandfather starts to explain, telling him that his only disciples was his mother and him. As Izuku realizes what was going on, he looks up into the sky and smiles. But then, Izuku looked at his grandfather and told him that he broke the boulder in half. As his grandfather looked at Izuku shocked and asked him if he really sliced it in half. As Izuku nodded, as both Tanjiro and his grandfather walk all the way up back to the boulder. As his grandfather sees that Izuku really did. As his grandfather smirks, telling Izuku that he's very impressed. He didn't know if Izuku would be able to slice the boulder in half that quickly. As his grandfather looked at Izuku, he told Izuku that he's ready, as Izuku was confused what his grandfather meant. As his grandfather started talking, telling him, back when quirks didn't exist, there used to be this thing called demons, as demon slayers use special breathing techniques to defeat them. As his grandfather started to explain, telling him that these are the breathing techniques that he taught him. As Izuku was stunned, as his grandfather continued talking, telling him that as the demons went extinct, as the demon slayers destroyed them, as humans started to develop quirks, as if the demons were holding them back, as humans evolved because the demons suffered, as Izuku was confused what his grandfather meant. As his grandfather continued, telling Izuku that there's one more breathing technique that he needs to teach him, and that only his family can use it, as it's been passed down from generation to generation. As Izuku was even more confused what his grandfather meant, as his grandfather put both of his hands out, telling him that it's called fire style, fire breathing. As his grandfather started to demonstrate it, Izuku was mesmerized as he immediately asked his grandfather to teach it to him, as his grandfather chuckled, telling Izuku to be patient. As for the next few years, Izuku started learning the fire style, as Izuku started mastering all of his breathing techniques, as Izuku was becoming a demon slayer. As the last day of training came, his grandfather told Izuku that he wants him to go to UA. As his grandfather continued, telling him that there's around 10 more months till the UA entrance exam, and that he wants him to leave now, and that it hasn't been a long time since he met his mother. As Izuku was confused why his grandfather was rushing him. As his grandfather continued, telling Izuku to not be afraid to make new things. As Izuku was confused at what his grandfather is talking about. As his grandfather continued, telling Izuku that he's a demon slayer now, and that there's a responsibility with that title. As he continues by telling Izuku that nowadays, people arrogant with powers are now the demon. Now it's his responsibility to slay the demon that's inside of them. As Izuku nods, understanding this. As Izuku leaves the next day, as he waves goodbye to his grandpa, as he returns a kind smile, his grandpa doesn't, as he just closes the door and leaves. As Izuku thinks to himself on how harsh his grandpa's been all of his life. As Izuku leaves to go finally meet his mom after a long time. As Izuku gets home that day, he greets his mom and his mom greets him back. As his mom asks Izuku if he wants her to cut his hair. As Izuku says no, saying that he likes his hair like this. As his mom nods and prepares dinner. As Izuku eats dinner, he smiles as widely as he possibly could and says that the food is great and he hasn't had food like this in such a long time. As Izuku goes to his old room and sleeps in his bed, as he feels much more comfortable than he's ever felt before. As his mom tells him that he has school the next day and that she enrolled him in a middle school. As Izuku nods, as Izuku falls asleep. As Izuku goes to his school next day, he meets Kacchan and he greets him. As both Kacchan and Izuku start catching up, Kacchan asks Izuku what quirk he has. As Izuku starts to explain to Kacchan what his quirk is. As Kacchan laughs, thinking that this is a weak quirk. But as Kacchan looks, he sees that Izuku is just smiling. As Kacchan gets annoyed by this, seeing that Izuku doesn't have any reaction. As Kacchan tells Izuku if he wants to fight. As Izuku asks Kacchan if he's serious, continuing to smile. As Kacchan gets even more annoyed by this, as he says yeah, he's serious, and that he wants to fight him at lunch. As Izuku nods and he sits down, as the teacher enters and sees that Izuku is sitting down, as he asks Izuku to stand up and introduce himself. As Izuku does this, everyone wonders what Izuku's quirk might be. As Izuku sits down, the teacher starts to explain that he knows that everyone wants to be a hero, including the new kid. As everyone looks at Izuku, still wondering what his quirk is. As the teacher starts to explain in what school that everyone wants to go to. As he gets to Bakugo, he sees Bakugo and tells Bakugo that he has a good chance in getting into UA. As he gets to Izuku, he sees that Izuku also wants to go to UA. As Bakugo looks at Izuku and scowls. As the class ends, Izuku goes up to the school roof where Bakugo told him that they needed to go. As Bakugo's lackeys follow Izuku and Kacchan. As Izuku gets there, as Bakugo tells Izuku for him to take the first move, as Bakugo starts making tiny explosions in his hands. As Izuku said okay, as he uses lightning breathing and blitzed at Kacchan, as Kacchan couldn't even see Izuku, as Izuku headbutts Kacchan straight in the head, as the lackeys were confused what was going on, as the lackeys pick up Kacchan and take him to the nurse's office. As Izuku thought to himself that he used too much power. As he himself went to the nurse's office, as Kacchan woke up, he started apologizing to Kacchan, telling him that he used too much power. As Kacchan was confused what Izuku was doing. As Izuku was just apologizing, Kacchan asked him how he was able to do that. And that he has a weak quirk and that he shouldn't have been able to do that. As Izuku didn't say anything, as he got up and left because his grandfather told him not to tell anyone about the breathing styles. Izuku leaves the school and starts walking home because he didn't want to answer anyone's questions anymore. As he started walking through, he goes under a bridge but didn't notice the sludge monster, as the sludge monster pops out of the vent and does the same thing in canon, as he starts suffocating Izuku trying to enter Izuku's body. As Izuku is getting more angrier and is trying to focus on his breathing, but since Izuku is suffocating, he couldn't do that. But then, out of nowhere, Izuku felt a huge sense of pressure and a huge focus on his breathing, out of nowhere, as Izuku's mark on his head started to grow, as Izuku's eyes started to glow red, as Izuku uses his hands and starts slicing up the sludge monster out of nowhere, as the sludge monster was confused what was going on, as Izuku's hands were on fire. As the sludge monster regrouped, it asked Izuku how he was able to do that, as Izuku said he didn't even know, as he never even knew this form or style of breathing before, but we know this is sun breathing. So now we continue on with the story with the sludge monster attacking Izuku again, as Izuku focuses on his breathing and dodges the attack and uses sun breathing to scorch the sludge monster as he cuts it in half. As the sludge monster is confused in how Izuku is so fast and so powerful. As he cuts the sludge monster in half, he picks up 2 bottles and starts filling the sludge monster in it. As Izuku finishes filling the sludge monster in the bottle, he uses some of his sensory breathing to sense things around him because he wants to make sure that none of his sludge monster friend could call over some friends. As Izuku's sensing around, he feels a strong presence coming toward him. As Izuku puts his hands out, getting ready to fight, waiting for the person to come. As All Might lands, he says, "I'm here." As he sees Izuku, he expects Izuku to fanboy out, but instead, Izuku was about to punch All Might in the face, but Izuku stops himself, realizing that this was All Might. As All Might sees this, he sighs, realizing that he didn't get punched, because he realized that that punch felt like it was gonna hurt. As Izuku could remember most of his childhood, and he could remember All Might somewhat, so he asks All Might if he's the #1 hero. As All Might says that he is, Izuku takes both of the bottles that were in his pockets, and he shows All Might that the sludge villain's inside of it. As All Might thanks Izuku and takes the bottles and jumps up into the air. As Izuku was suspicious still, and grabs onto All Might's legs, as All Might didn't notice. As All Might sees that Izuku grabbed onto his legs, he immediately landed on a roof. As All Might started scolding Izuku for grabbing onto his legs. As Izuku stops him and asks All Might if he's the real deal, or the real All Might. As All Might starts to explain to Izuku, telling him that he's the real All Might and he doesn't have to worry. But before All Might could continue, his timer runs out and All Might poofs into his skinny form. As Izuku said he knew it, as he puts his hands up and rushes toward All Might, as he's about to punch All Might as All Might puts his hands up. As Izuku stopped his punch and put his hands down, and asked All Might to explain, as All Might started to explain to Izuku about his injury. As Izuku started apologizing to All Might, telling him that he's sorry for judging him too quickly, as All Might says that it's okay. But before they can all start talking again, a loud explosion appears out of nowhere. Before even All Might could react or say anything, Izuku took a deep breath in and jumped off the building. As Izuku landed, he switched his breathing styles to lightning breathing, as he immediately dashed toward the huge explosion. As Izuku got there, he sees the sludge monster, but he also sees the sludge monster also has a hostage. As he looks closer, he realizes that this is Kacchan, as Kacchan was using his explosions to escape. As he saw the sludge monster, he realizes when he must have grabbed onto All Might, the sludge monster must have fallen off. As Izuku slaps his head, as he sees the sludge monster laugh louder and louder. As Izuku gets more and more angry, as the mark on his head grows again, as his eyes glow red. As Izuku's arms immediately turn to fire, as Izuku immediately dashes toward the sludge monster, as he cuts Bakugo out of the sludge monster and puts him to the side. As Izuku reverts his attention toward the sludge monster, he immediately dashes toward the sludge monsters as the crowd couldn't even see Izuku. As Izuku immediately started cutting the sludge monster into many tiny pieces. As the sludge monster's body fell to the ground, Izuku didn't know what was going on, as the mark on his head went away, as his eye color went back to its regular green. As Izuku is realizing what was going on, he realizes the breathing technique that he just used was very similar to a combination of all the breathing styles, as Izuku wondered what was going on. But before Izuku could do anything else, all the heroes started crowding him and started praising him for his skills, as Izuku said that it was nothing, as Bakugo saw this and was getting angry, as he said that he was the one suffering and now he's getting the praise, as Bakugo walked away angrily, as Izuku beat him in the fight and now he saved him, as Bakugo walked away angrily. As everyone was done praising Izuku, Izuku walked away heading home. But before he could get home, All Might interjects and starts talking to Izuku, telling him that he inspired him and that he would like to pass on his power to Izuku. As Izuku thought and told All Might that he wouldn't like All Might's power, as he's not interested in someone else's power except his. As All Might says that it's a reasonable choice, as All Might is about to walk away. But before he could, Izuku taps All Might in the shoulder and asks All Might for some training. As All Might laughs and tells Izuku that he would be happy to train him. As Izuku wakes up the next morning, he remembers All Might telling him to wear a gym outfit and to come to the certain beach. As Izuku gets there, he sees All Might there, ready to train him. As All Might asks Izuku to lift up his shirt. As All Might tells Izuku that he doesn't look that muscular, so they're gonna probably be training. As Izuku takes off his shirt completely, All Might sees Izuku's body and sees that every muscle in his body is completely toned, as he sees many scars on Izuku's body, as All Might wonders what Izuku's training is. As All Might starts talking, telling Izuku that he was mistaken and that Izuku doesn't need to do any physical training, as All Might wonders what Izuku should be doing. As All Might tells Izuku that he doesn't have anything to train with Izuku, as Izuku sighs and is about to leave. But then, All Might tells Izuku that he probably knows someone that could help him. As Izuku meets All Might the next day, a girl was next to All Might. As she introduces herself, as her name is Shinobu Kucho, as she's the butterfly hero. Then she starts to explain to Izuku, telling him that her hero name is the insect Hashira. Then All Might starts to explain, telling Izuku that Shinobu and him have a pretty similar quirk. That's why Shinobu is gonna be training Izuku. As Izuku is still unfazed and bows to Shinobu. As Shinobu doesn't say anything, as she just blushes, as she says that it's okay and that they can be friends. As Izuku just bows again. As Shinobu says stop it. But then, All Might starts to tell Izuku that they should get started on their training right now. As Shinobu pulls out a small gorge and tells Izuku to breathe into this. As Izuku's confused, Shinobu started to explain her quirk, telling Izuku that she can breathe out poisonous gas. And now that helped her with her lung capacity. Increasing her lung capacity increased the amount of gas that she could breathe. So she told Izuku to breathe into this gorge that can expand. As Izuku nodded and started breathing into it, as he immediately broke the gorge. As Shinobu was just astonished and shocked, as she pulled out her medium gorge. As Izuku started blowing into it, as Shinobu thought that Izuku was going to, he was going to be unable to break it. But Izuku, sure enough, broke it. As Shinobu thought to herself, thinking on how it took her till her second year in UA to break the medium gorge. As she pulled out a large gorge and told Izuku to breathe into this. As Izuku kept on breathing, as Shinobu thought that this was a match for Izuku. As Izuku kept on breathing, he immediately broke it, as Shinobu was just astonished at Izuku's strength, as she gets frustrated with Izuku. As she tells Izuku to wait here, and she went to go make the huge gorge that she brought. As she brought the gorge, she told Izuku to breathe into this. As Izuku started breathing into the size of a gorge that was still his height, as Izuku was around 6 feet, as she started to breathe into it, it took him a long time to break it, as the gorge started to expand as Izuku wasn't unable to break it. By the end of the day, Izuku used a huge breath of air as he immediately broke the gorge. As Shinobu saw this, She was astonished at Izuku's strength, as she asked Izuku how he was able to do that, as Izuku just shrugged his shoulders and told her that it was just a lot of training that he did when he was a kid, as Shinobu just was astonished at Izuku's strength even more. As Shinobu calmed down, she told Izuku that it's probably gonna take her a while to make an even bigger gorge, and then told Izuku for some training, he should probably just clear all the trash that's on this beach. As Izuku woke up the next day, he started clearing all the trash that was on the beach. As Izuku actually cleared all the trash in one day, in less than 5 hours. As Izuku was just getting bored as he started doing some martial arts in the air, by himself. As he started doing some kicks and punches as he started practicing his sword forms. As Shinobu got there with her huge gorge that was at least 2 stories high. As Izuku saw it, he was astonished as he actually felt a bit nervous. But then Shinobu looked behind him and saw that Izuku cleared all the trash, as Shinobu was just astonished at Izuku's strength. But then she looked at Izuku as he actually looked worried, as Shinobu had a grin on her face, seeing that Izuku was worried of the gorge. As for the next few months, Izuku started training with the gorge, as after the 5-month mark, he was able to break it. As Shinobu saw this, she was just astonished and started asking Izuku and how he was able to break it, as Izuku just shrugged his shoulders, not knowing how to answer Shinobu's question. As Shinobu gets frustrated at this and tells Izuku that she's done making the gorges and it's probably time to spar, as Izuku said okay and is gonna be sparring Shinobu. As Shinobu gets into a fighting stance and then Izuku does, as Izuku uses the first form of the water style, as Izuku feels his styles and his breathing techniques have gotten much more powerful, as Izuku rushes at Shinobu, as Shinobu just dodges up into the air, as she tells Izuku that he's being predictable. As Izuku gets mad at this and is about to hit Shinobu again, but Shinobu coats 2 daggers with her poison and throws them at Izuku. As Izuku is about to dodge a dagger, he gets hit by another, as Izuku falls to the ground as he starts coughing uncontrollably. As Shinobu laughs, telling Izuku that he's being very predictable. He depends too much on his breathing, and now since she's making him cough, he can't breathe, so he can't use his quirk. As Izuku gets annoyed by this and gets frustrated, as Izuku's mark on his forehead starts to grow, as his eyes glow red, as Izuku just immediately stops coughing, as Shinobu was confused what was going on, as she yells at Izuku and asks him why her poison's not working. As Shinobu is confused, Izuku just stands up, as his hands go on fire, as Shinobu is confused because this isn't part of his quirk. As Izuku just rushes at Shinobu and he's about to neck chop her right in the neck. But then, right about before he's about to hit her, he stops himself, realizing that he could have killed her. But then, all of a sudden, Izuku succumbs to the poison and falls to the ground, passing out. As Shinobu starts to explain, telling Izuku that a part of her quirk is manipulation of the poison. So she can manipulate her poison to do anything that she wants. And she made sure that Izuku couldn't be able to move after the coughing was done. Then Shinobu starts laughing at Izuku's incompetence. But then she stops laughing, realizing that Izuku stopped himself, as that ability could have killed her. As she remembers Izuku about to neck chop her. Then she wakes up Izuku with an antidote and tells Izuku that their main priority right now is training that ability so that ability doesn't go out of control. As Izuku nods, then bowing down to Shinobu, as Shinobu blushes, telling Izuku to stop it again. As Izuku, for the rest of the few months, Izuku's been training on his sun breathing, as he's able to also... Okay guys, I'm gonna end the video off for right now. So what basically happened in the last part was, Izuku was training on his sun breathing, but also another technique. And this was the 3 sword style. See, this sword style is gonna be kind of different. If you guys have watched God of High School, there's this technique and sword style called the Moonlight Sword Style, and you can use your hands as a sword, so that's one of the techniques. And Izuku has 2 hands, so he's gonna have 2 swords basically, and he's gonna have 1 sword in his mouth. That's basically how this version of the 3 sword style is gonna be working. And if some of you are wondering why I'm giving Izuku the 3 sword style, I actually asked you guys in the end of the video in the last part if you guys wanted the 3 sword style. So if you guys waited up till then, that's where you guys decided, and most of you said yes, so that's what I'm going to be doing today. So we continue on with the story as Izuku not only was training on his sun breathing, but also a new technique that he created called the Moonlight 3 sword style. And this sword style, like I explained, is using both of his hands and one sword in his mouth. As we continue on with the story, as Shinobu walks in on Izuku having a sword in his mouth. Shinobu's just confused what's going on as she asks Izuku what he's doing. Izuku takes the sword out of his mouth and tells Shinobu that he's trying to learn this new technique that he's going to be creating. As Shinobu is just confused, she asks Izuku why, as Izuku says that in their last fight, Izuku realized that he was depending on his breathing too much, so he wanted to create this new sword style so he doesn't have to depend on his breathing. As Shinobu just smirks, thinking how strong that she actually is. As Izuku says that she wasn't actually that strong and it was probably just because of the poison. As Shinobu hears this, she starts yelling at Deku, telling him to be quiet. As the time skip ends, Izuku trains a lot and actually grows in strength as he's extremely strong right now. As I would say that he's probably equivalent to before time skip Zoro. That's how strong I would say Izuku really is. As we come to the final day of training, Shinobu wishes Izuku good luck as the next day Izuku goes to the UA gate. As this day is the entrance exam. As Izuku enters the gates, he sees Bakugo, as Bakugo stares back at Izuku, not saying anything with a blank expression, but Izuku could notice that Bakugo is not happy that Izuku's here. Then after that, Bakugo just scowls at Izuku and walks away. But Izuku didn't know what to do at that moment. He didn't know if he was supposed to chase after Bakugo or not. As he just continues walking, he accidentally trips as Izuku was gonna fall, but he stops himself as Uraraka was about to touch him, but Izuku just leans back forward as he stands upright as Uraraka is just surprised at Izuku's upper body strength. Then Izuku notices Uraraka right next to him and starts blushing as he's actually never talked to a girl his age. And yes, he's talked to the hero Shinobu, but it doesn't count since she's much older than Izuku. As Izuku starts blushing, looking at Uraraka, noticing that she's actually pretty cute, as she tells Izuku that he has a pretty strong upper body strength. But Izuku didn't know what to do at that moment as he just bows, yelling thank you. Uraraka was just confused at this moment and this action that Izuku just did, as she just walked away. As Izuku straightens himself up, realizing that he just blew it. Thinking to himself that he doesn't have that good of an experience talking to girls. As Izuku walks into the building, he sees that he has to take the written portion of the exam. When he takes the written portion of the exam, he realizes that he didn't get a pretty good score, as he even barely passed, as let's say that he has to get around a 70 to pass, as Izuku scraped by with a 70.1. As Izuku just wonders to himself if he got any other question wrong, he probably would have failed. As Izuku got into the orientation where President Mike is sitting down and is about to explain the robot situation. As he's listening to the robot situation, another kid is mumbling to himself, wondering what he's gonna be doing. As Ida stands up, seeing this kid mumbling, he told the kid to be quiet as Izuku looks at Ida in disapproval. As Izuku looks over to the kid who is mumbling, he sees that that kid is pretty short and has purple balls for hair. As Izuku looks at him, he sees the kid sitting in between two girls, as this kid has a nosebleed. As Izuku realizes that this kid is mumbling because he's sitting next to two girls. As Izuku thought that he was actually strategizing, since Izuku's smarts is in strategizing. Then President Mike yells at everyone, telling everyone to settle down, and that he's going to be explaining the robot situation. As he explains to everyone, telling everyone that there's a 1-pointer, 2-pointer, 3-pointer, and a 0-pointer. As everyone learns about the 0-pointer, they wonder how weak the robot's gonna be. As everyone gets ready near the gate, as they were stretching, Izuku sees the girl that he got embarrassed near, and wanted to make it right again. As he was about to walk near the girl, Ida walks up to Izuku and tells him that he probably shouldn't go disturb her. As Izuku was about to answer Ida, all of a sudden, the gates open as President Mike yells at everyone, telling everyone that he's not going to tell everyone to go and that real heroes rush into battle. As everyone immediately blitzed except for Izuku, as Izuku's just staring at all the robots and wondering what's going on. When Izuku realized what was going on, he immediately used lightning breathing as he immediately dashed in, started to destroy many robots as he possibly can. As everyone just looked at Izuku in amazement, because they just saw Izuku at the gate not moving, and all of a sudden he's right next to them, defeating a robot, as all of them are just confused and wonders what Izuku's quirk is. As everyone's defeating robots, and so is Izuku, as Izuku's actually defeating a lot of robots. As Kacchan sees this, he gets aggravated and starts defeating more and more robots, and Izuku sees this as they have an unspoken rivalry. But all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a huge 0-point robot appeared. As Izuku can hear a blood-curdling scream come out of nowhere. As everyone else is running back, Izuku notices Uraraka, the same girl who he met earlier, stuck under some rubble. As Izuku knew what he had to do, he immediately rushed in and picked up the rubble and, used lightning breathing and blitzed back. As Uraraka was just confused as she was just stuck under some rubble and all of a sudden she's over here. As Izuku walked back toward the 0-point robot as he was concentrating on his breathing. As he immediately used sun breathing. As he got flames on his hands as everyone was just wondering what was going on. But before even a millisecond could even happen, Izuku immediately blitzed in and jumped up into the air as super high as he possibly can and cuts off the robot's head clean. As everyone just looks in astonishment as they just see how fast Izuku was and how powerful he was. As everyone's just wondering what Izuku's quirk is. Then Izuku lands on the ground as immediately President Mike yells that the exam is over. That everyone is just still in astonishment in how powerful Izuku is. As Bakugo thought to himself, telling himself that Izuku is a show-off. As Uraraka immediately rushes up to Izuku and starts thanking him. Izuku just doesn't say anything as he sees Uraraka so close up to him and is just blushing. As Izuku is just wondering how he's supposed to get out of this. But Izuku calms down and tells Uraraka that he apologizes for, being so weird earlier. As Uraraka says that it's alright and that she should apologize for being so weak. As Izuku says that she doesn't have to worry about that. And if she wants, he can help her train. As Uraraka looks at Izuku and tells Izuku that would be so helpful. But we skip to the perspective of Principal Nezu. He was just looking at the entrance exam as he sees Izuku blitz into the gate as Principal Nezu just sees how fast Izuku really is. As he looks at Izuku's papers and realizes that Izuku's quirk is called breathing and head, and is just confused how Izuku is able to move so fast. As Principal Nezu reads into Izuku's papers more and realizes that Izuku has been living in the mountains for a pretty long time, and that he's been living with his grandfather. As Principal Nezu is just wondering what's going on, as he's very curious about Izuku's life. As the entrance exam continues, Principal Nezu notices Izuku having fire on his hands as he rushes into the 0-pointer as he jumps up into the air and cuts off the 0-pointer's head immediately. As Principal Nezu jumps out of his chair, seeing Izuku do this. As Principal Nezu didn't know how Izuku was able to do this, but knew that he had to come to the bottom of this and see if Izuku was cheating or not. As Principal Nezu went to Izuku's house with someone special. As he knocks on Izuku's door, Izuku opens it and sees someone who's taller than Principal Nezu and has black hair that falls all the way down to his shoulders and has a scarf on his neck. As Izuku's wondering what's going on, Principal Nezu tells Izuku that this is a person named Aizawa and that he's gonna be his teacher, and that Izuku should be able to show him the techniques that he used in the entrance exam. As Izuku was confused and tells Principal Nezu that he would be glad to show Principal Nezu some of his techniques. Then they all head outside for Izuku to show some of their techniques, as Izuku shows some regular breathing techniques and some, regular swords techniques. as Principal Nezu isn't interested in this and tells Izuku to show him the technique where he got fire on his hands. As Izuku looked at Principal Nezu, worried why Principal Nezu wants to see this the most. As Izuku concentrates and uses his certain breathing style and appears with fire on his hands. Then Principal Nezu nods at Aizawa, telling him to do it. Then Aizawa Sensei turns on his quirk as Izuku's flames dullen, as there's not that many flames on Izuku's arm as there was before, as Principal Nezu is just confused what's going on, as Aizawa's quirk is to cancel out all quirks. As Izuku realized what was going on, he immediately stopped using the breathing style as Principal Nezu walked up to Izuku and asked him what he was doing with this weird techniques. As Izuku just looks at Principal Nezu in a serious tone and tells Principal Nezu that he's unable to tell Principal Nezu and how he obtained these techniques and how he's able to use them. As Principal Nezu just sighs, telling Izuku that it's alright, and basically hands him his UA entrance letter, as they both walk away. But Izuku was just confused, as he was expecting for them to persuade him, but I guess he doesn't have to tell them right now. As Izuku opens up the letter that Principal Nezu handed him, a disc falls out and lands on the ground, as an All Might hologram appears, telling Izuku that he got first place on the entrance exam, and that he got around 100 rescue points, and around, let's say around 80 villain points. Then the All Might hologram continues, telling him that he got first place on the entrance exam, and that he welcomes him to UA. And you guys are probably wondering why Izuku was being interrogated by Principal Nezu. The real reason is Principal Nezu watching Izuku fight and basically do all of these supernatural feats with a simple quirk like his is unbelievable. So Principal Nezu just wanted to make sure that Izuku isn't cheating with some type of support gear or any other thing that would make him much more stronger. So Principal Nezu's suspicions were right, that Izuku just has some type of abilities that he can use with his quirk. But this doesn't end here, as Principal Nezu tells Aizawa when they get back to campus to keep a close eye on Izuku and make sure that Izuku gets the proper training to become an amazing hero, as Principal Nezu feels like Izuku is destined to become the #1 hero. But now we switch to the perspective of Izuku, as Izuku's just standing there, realizing that he got the first score, as he's just astonished in how he was able to get the first score so easily, as he expected Bakugo to at least make second place, but it turns out Bakugo made third, as Izuku just wonders who made second. But then the next day comes by as Izuku gets ready for school and is about to leave his house as he got dressed. But then as he leaves his house and closes the door, he sees. So last time where we left off was Izuku getting ready to go to school. As he exits his house, he sees a person with blue hair reaching down to his shoulders, as he just looks aggressive and looks like he's about to punch Izuku. As Izuku immediately dodges Inosuke's punch, Inosuke falls on the ground, asking Izuku why he dodged. As Izuku said that a regular response to a punch is dodging it. As Inosuke got mad and snarled at Izuku. Izuku didn't respond to that, as Izuku just didn't say anything, as he just continued walking. As Inosuke immediately started chasing after Izuku, as he asked Izuku how he knows those sword styles, as Izuku's confused what Inosuke means. Then Inosuke continues, telling Izuku that the sword styles that he used were the Moonlight Sword style, and that weird technique that he used with the Moonlight Sword style. As Izuku hears this, he asks Inosuke how he knows this, as Inosuke says the same thing back to Izuku. As both of them are confused, Inosuke says that his grandfather taught him how to use the Moonlight Sword style, as Izuku said the same thing. As both of them are just confused in how their grandfather taught them the Moonlight Sword style. Then Izuku asks Inosuke if he knows what demons are. Inosuke thinks and tells Izuku that he does, and that they went extinct a long time ago, and that's when humans started to develop quirks. Izuku nods, telling Inosuke that if both of them know what demons are, that means both of their grandfathers were like descendants of the demon slayers, and so are they, as both of them realize what's going on. Then Inosuke asks Izuku what the mark on his head was. As Izuku remembers it, he doesn't know what it is exactly, as he just tells Inosuke that he doesn't know exactly either, as whenever he's using sun breathing or fire breathing, it somehow grows, as Inosuke is confused when Izuku said sun breathing and fire breathing. Then Inosuke asked Izuku and what those breathing styles are. When Izuku explains, Inosuke starts talking, telling Izuku that he only focused on one breathing style, and that was animal sensory breathing style, and that he didn't have much other breathing styles to practice, but his grandfather made him practice moonlight sword style the most. Izuku is just confused since he's never heard of this new breathing style. As he asks Inosuke, Inosuke explains the breathing style, telling him that he can basically sense things around him, using like feeling the air particles. And also, it also helps him with his quirk. His quirk is called sensory enhancement. Izuku is just confused what Inosuke means. Inosuke then sighs and starts to explain to Izuku, telling him what basically his quirk is allows him to sense things around him, and it's pretty similar to his breathing style. But whenever he uses his breathing style with his quirk, his range increases dramatically as he can sense more things. Izuku is just impressed, but Inosuke continues, telling him that whenever he uses his breathing style and combination with his sensory, he also gets a slight enhancement in strength and durability and speed. Izuku is just impressed as he thinks that Inosuke's quirk is pretty good. But then Inosuke remembers what he came here to meet Izuku for, as he pulls out his hand and points it at Izuku, telling him that he came here to challenge Izuku, as Izuku is just confused why Inosuke wants to challenge him. As Inosuke explains, telling Izuku that he wants to challenge him since he beat him in the entrance exam. Then Izuku realized that Inosuke got second place on the entrance exam. Then Izuku notices the time and tells Inosuke that if they fight here right now, that they probably would be late to the first day of school. As Inosuke notices this, he immediately starts rushing away, telling Izuku that they'll fight another time and that Inosuke will win. As Izuku hears to himself, hearing Inosuke talk in third person, as he's just confused. Yeah, I'm just adding this to Inosuke's personality if you were wondering, because I want to make him like a shonen, like, you know, like antagonist but protagonist, like a Vegeta character. That's what I'm going to be doing with Inosuke. And let's just continue on the story. As Izuku laughs to himself, realizing that there's other people just like him. When Izuku gets to UA, he walks into the building and gets to the 1A classroom door as he notices how big the door is. Then Izuku opens the door just to see Ida scolding Bakugo for putting his foot up on the desk and Inosuke leaning back on his desk while chewing gum. As Ida's yelling at them, he notices Izuku as he immediately rushes over and starts apologizing to Izuku, telling him that he's obviously the superior student and that he shouldn't have talked to Izuku that way. As Izuku said that it's fine, but then all of a sudden, Uraraka walks in and sees Izuku as she starts thanking Izuku for saving her, as Izuku starts blushing, not knowing what to say to Uraraka. Then Izuku immediately bows down, saying that it was a pleasure to save Uraraka, as everyone's just looking at Izuku in confusement. But Izuku was saved as something even more strange just entered the classroom. It was a caterpillar, but when it turned around, it had a face, as it was just a sleeping bag with Aizawa in it. As Aizawa got up and out of his sleeping bag and stood up near the podium, telling everyone that they need to put on these gym uniforms, and tells everyone to meet him outside. As everyone is changing in the locker rooms, everyone notices that Izuku's body is shredded, as Izuku has muscles where none of them even could imagine where muscles could be. That's how strong Izuku is. His muscles are condensed, that's why they look like that, but Izuku's extremely strong. Then everyone immediately bombards Izuku, asking him how he got so strong. Izuku just responds by saying that he trained for 20 hours a day for 10 years, and that's how he got this strong. As everyone is just like surprised in how casually Izuku just said that. As everyone puts on their gym outfits and head outside, they see Aizawa waiting for them. When they get there, Aizawa calls over Izuku as Izuku comes forward and Aizawa throws Izuku a ball. As everyone else is confused, and so is Izuku. Out of that confusion, Uraraka asks Aizawa why they're not at orientation. Then Aizawa sighs, telling Uraraka that they're not at orientation because here at UA, they don't follow tradition. As everyone is just confused, Aizawa looks over at Izuku, still holding the ball, and tells Izuku to throw the ball. As Izuku, still who's holding the ball, pulls back his hand and chucks the ball as far as he can, as it comes up as 700 meters. As everyone is astonished at Izuku's strength, as Izuku is walking away, Aizawa calls over Izuku, telling him to use his quirk this time. As everyone is just in awe and realizing that Izuku didn't use his quirk. Then, Izuku walks up to the front as Aizawa threw him a new ball. Izuku holds the ball, focusing on a new breathing style. As Izuku's focusing on this new breathing style that he's creating, which specifically enhances his strength, he figures one out as he immediately pulls back his hand and throws it. As the ball keeps on going further and further and further, as it's just a tiny dot that they can see. As Aizawa is impressed and turns over the device that shows how far the ball went, as it shows that the ball went around 2,000 feet, as everyone is just astonished in how far Izuku threw the ball. And Izuku dominates everyone in all the other events, and he gets first place on this exam. And let me also explain in how Inosuke's went. Inosuke gets the ball expecting to do the same just like Izuku. As he throws the ball, it lands at 600 feet. As he thinks to himself that he could throw it farther, as he asks Aizawa if he can do it again. As Aizawa throws him another ball, he throws it again and gets the same score. As he's just angered that he can't throw it further than that. And everyone is still impressed with Inosuke. And Bakugo does the same, getting it a bit higher than Inosuke. But in all the other events, Inosuke gets second place, and he gets second place in overall as Bakugo gets third. As Inosuke is just pissed with Izuku's strength. After all the classes end for that day, Inosuke meets Izuku outside. As Izuku is just wondering what's going on, as Inosuke is like right under the UA gates where he's supposed to exit. As Inosuke throws his backpack to the side and takes out his hands, pointing it toward Izuku, telling him that he wants to fight him right here and now to show him that he's much more better than him. As Izuku sighs, telling Inosuke that he's too lazy to do this right now, but if he wants to do this, Izuku pulls out his backpack and throws it to the side, as he puts his hands up as well, telling Inosuke that he's ready. Okay, let's do a bit of recap here. Last time where we left off, Izuku went to his first day of school and met Inosuke. And as the day ended, both Inosuke and Izuku wanted to see who's the strongest out of the both of them, as both of them throw their backpacks to the side and get ready to fight. As Inosuke immediately rushes at Izuku, about to slash him with his Moonlight Sword style. And if you guys don't remember, Moonlight Sword style is a sword style which allows their hands to be their weapons, or their swords. So Inosuke immediately rushes at Izuku and uses his sword style, as Izuku notices that Inosuke is pretty good with the Moonlight Sword style and sees how efficient he is. But Izuku is still pretty strong and dodges them, as Inosuke is impressed. As he notices that Izuku's not using his full power, as he tells Izuku to use his full power, as Izuku tells Inosuke that he probably won't be able to handle it. After a while of dodging, Izuku finally thinks of attacking Inosuke, as he decides to use the breathing technique that he used when he was using the ball throw, as he thinks to himself and says strength breathing, as he immediately enhances his whole body, as Inosuke can feel the presence coming off Izuku. With no time to dodge or do anything, Izuku looks for an opening and punches Inosuke straight in the gut, as Inosuke spits out some blood and dodges back and falls back, as he's scared in how strong Izuku really is. As Inosuke gets up and tells Izuku that he's not done yet, as he immediately uses his presence quirk, which enhances his strength, and uses his animal sensory presence, breathing style, which also enhances his quirk and his strength. Then, Izuku immediately rushes in, still using his strength breathing style, and tries to punch Inosuke, but nothing's happening. Since Inosuke is using both his presence and his quirk, he notices that he can see the air particles and where Izuku's exactly gonna attack, and Inosuke is able to dodge this, as Inosuke smiles, telling Izuku the same thing. Then, Inosuke starts laughing, telling Izuku that there's probably no chance he's gonna win now. As Izuku smirks, telling Inosuke that he shouldn't assure himself that he's gonna win just yet. As Izuku immediately starts using lightning breathing and starts blitzing around Inosuke. As Inosuke's confused what's going on since he can't read where Izuku's gonna attack. As Izuku says that he won't be able to dodge something if it's too fast. As Izuku immediately uses his strength breathing and punches Inosuke straight in the gut, again making Inosuke fall back. As Izuku's wondering what's going on, Izuku feels a hidden rage growing inside of him. As all of a sudden the mark on Izuku's forehead starts to grow, as he's just wondering as this uncontrollable rage starts growing. As flames start to appear on Izuku's hands, and he rushes toward Inosuke, but all of a sudden, a scarf appears, wrapping around Izuku's arm. As the scarf pulls Izuku down, as Izuku is wondering what's going on, as he sees Aizawa standing right next to Inosuke. Then, all of a sudden, Aizawa starts yelling at both Izuku and Inosuke, telling them that this is just the first day of school and they're already getting into a fight, and he wants both of them to go to the principal's office. As both of them walk to the principal's office, Izuku's just wondering what happened to him and why he couldn't control his rage and why he couldn't control his breathing style. Then, Inosuke bonks Izuku in the head, telling him that the Principal Nezu's office is right there. As both of them walk in, Principal Nezu looks at them and asks them what happened. As both of them respond, telling Principal Nezu they just wanted to see who was stronger. As Principal Nezu sighs, telling them that they can train on their own another time, and that he's just gonna let them off with a warning, but he doesn't want this to ever happen again. As Izuku smiles, thanking Principal Nezu for not expelling them. As Principal Nezu chuckles, telling Izuku and Inosuke that they can go home now. As both of them were walking home, Izuku asks Inosuke if he knows anything about an uncontrollable rage. As Inosuke doesn't do anything, as he just shrugs his shoulders, telling Izuku that he doesn't know anything about it. As Izuku goes back home and lies down in his bed, wondering what that rage was. And then, when the next day arrives, Izuku goes to school, and then all of a sudden, All Might barges through the door, telling everyone that they better get ready for the hero course training. As everyone gets excited seeing All Might, and also realize that they could wear their costumes. And if you guys can see the screen right now, you guys can see that Deku character, and Izuku's gonna look like that. So that's how Izuku's gonna look. And let's just continue on with the story. As Izuku gets to the hall and wears his costume, All Might says that everyone looks like that they're professional heroes already. Then All Might tells everyone that the training is gonna consist of 2 villains and 2 heroes, and the villains are gonna try to protect the bomb, as the heroes either try to capture the villains or take the bomb for themselves without the villains defeating them. As all of them get extremely excited, and they look over and they start talking to each other. As Izuku looks over, he notices Inosuke with a pig head, as he's just wondering what's going on, as he realizes that this is Inosuke's costume. As Izuku immediately starts laughing, looking at Inosuke, as Inosuke is just confused, as he thinks that this is actually a pretty good costume. But then, All Might tells everyone to settle down, telling everyone that he's gonna pick the teams now, as he tells Izuku and Uraraka are gonna be on a team, and Bakugo and Ida are gonna be on the team. The teams are not gonna be different here, so let's just keep on going on with the story. As Izuku and Uraraka get ready, Izuku tells Uraraka that it probably seems that Bakugo is gonna come in and rush at Izuku, since he knows how Bakugo is gonna do. As Uraraka understands, as Izuku continues, telling Uraraka that she should probably sneak up and try to capture the bomb before the villains even figure out that they're up there. as Uraraka agrees with Izuku as she sneaks off looking for the bomb. As some time passes by, Bakugo immediately rushes through looking for Deku, as he yells out to Deku telling him that he's gonna beat him now and that there's no chance since he's been training a lot and he also has a trick up his sleeve. As Izuku is confused, Bakugo immediately rushes in as Izuku notices that Bakugo's explosions have improved significantly, as Bakugo immediately starts blitzing through as Izuku realizes that he's probably as fast as his thunder breathing. As he's just wondering what's going on, Izuku decides that he might as well keep up with Bakugo and uses his thunder breathing as he immediately starts flying by. As both of them are blitzing around each other, Izuku decides that he might as well use his strength breathing as he immediately shifts to it and lands a punch on Bakugo as Bakugo lands to the side. But then Bakugo gets up, telling Izuku that he's not done just yet, as he immediately rushes through yelling at Deku. As Izuku notices that there's red sparks forming around Bakugo. As he's wondering what's going on, Bakugo immediately gets faster and faster as he also uses his explosions as Izuku couldn't keep up with Bakugo. As Izuku finally decides that even though this is kind of dangerous, he decides to use his sun breathing. As he goes into his sun breathing form, all of a sudden the mark on Izuku's forehead starts to grow. As all of a sudden, like flames on Izuku's hand starts to grow as well. As Izuku immediately blitz in and goes and headbutts like Bakugo. As Bakugo falls back, having almost a concussion. As Bakugo, who's almost like about to faint, he decides to use his explosions. As All Might yells no, telling Bakugo that that's too dangerous. As Bakugo yells at All Might, telling him that Izuku could probably handle it. As he immediately uses his gauntlets, making a huge explosion. As Izuku sees the explosion, he immediately blitz into the explosion, cutting it into 4 pieces. As Bakugo is amazed, he looks to the smoke, looking for Izuku, as he notices that Izuku's gone. As Izuku uses thunder breathing to go all the way to Uraraka. As he sees Uraraka fighting Ida, he decides that he might as well end this quick, as he immediately uses his thunder breathing and hits, Ida in the back, making him faint onto the ground. As Izuku decides that he might as well touch the bomb to end the game. As he immediately walks to the bomb, but all of a sudden, Bakugo jumps through the floor, and starts throwing explosions at Izuku. As Izuku looks at Uraraka, as Uraraka nods, as she immediately rushes in. But then all of a sudden, she trips. As she looks down, she notices that it's Ida, as she's wondering what's going on. But then, Bakugo looks at Ida, and Ida looks right back at Bakugo. As both of them nod at each other, both of them start using combos on Uraraka and Deku. As both Uraraka and Deku start falling back, going further and further away from the bomb. As Izuku doesn't know what to do, and neither does Uraraka. So last time where we left off with both Izuku and, basically everyone in Class 1A doing their hero training with All Might. So basically, everyone's hero training with All Might is done, so let's just jump straight into the USJ arc. So everyone gets onto the bus, and since Izuku's clothes and hero clothes are super burnt, he can't wear them, so he has to wear his regular gym clothes from UA. So while everyone's on their bus, everyone starts talking about their quirks and how Izuku's quirk and, Bakugo's and, Todoroki's quirk are super cool, and how they would like to trade their quirks for theirs. As Izuku says that his quirk's actually not that great, it just helps him breathe better. As everyone's wondering what Izuku's saying, Izuku explains to them, telling them that basically his stuff is, kind of confidential and he can't tell them everything, but basically his quirk allows him to breathe better. As everyone's just wondering what he's talking about, all of a sudden everyone gets to UA as Aizawa tells everyone to quiet down and to get off the bus. When Izuku sees the USJ, Izuku gets a weird feeling. He doesn't know what it is, but he knows something's wrong. As he tells Aizawa this, he tells Aizawa that something feels wrong, but Aizawa just says to tell him what's wrong inside when they get inside the USJ. As Izuku listens to Aizawa, but Izuku still feels unsettling. Something familiar, but he knows that something's wrong. As Izuku walks into the USJ, he sees 13 as 13 starts to explain everything to everyone, as everyone starts looking around the USJ and sees how amazing it looks. As Izawa tells everyone that they should pay attention to 13, but then all of a sudden, down in the middle of the USJ, a portal appears, as everyone hears a portal opening, as they all look at it, as this huge portal appears, as Shigaraki and the Nomu step out, as Izuku's bad feeling was correct. But as immediately as the Nomu stepped out, Izuku immediately knew what it was. Yes, this is still the same Nomu, but this is a bit different. This Nomu is a demon, and Izuku knew that he had to, kill this demon to make sure that it doesn't exist anymore, as Izuku was wondering how demons even still exists. As immediately as Izuku blitzed down and is about to attack the Nomu, but the Attaku blocks himself, and Izuku doesn't know how to attack the Nomu, as the Nomu is huge and has multiple quirks and is also a demon. As Izuku immediately uses his lightning breathing and starts blitzing around the Nomu as he tries to look for an opening and starts attacking it. But then, as Izuku stops, all of a sudden Shigaraki lunges at Izuku, and with no other choice to, deflect this attack, Izuku immediately cuts off one of Shigaraki's hands, as Shigaraki starts screaming in pain, telling the Nomu to kill Izuku, as all the other villains start flooding in, as they start to attack all the other kids, as everyone's trying to do their own thing, but Izuku's focusing on the Nomu, remembering his grandfather's words, telling him that the Demon Slayer Corps got rid of all the demons, and that's the reason why everyone is safe. And Izuku starts, blitzing around this Nomu, trying to kill it as fast as possible. But this Nomu doesn't have multiple openings. But then, the Nomu, all of a sudden, uses one huge punch and knocks Izuku straight to the ground. As Izuku passes out, all of a sudden, Izuku wakes up and the mark on his forehead starts to grow, as his eyes start to glow red, as all of a sudden, Izuku starts blitzing around the Nomu as he starts to use sun breathing, as all of a sudden, the mark on his hand starts to grow as well, as all of a sudden, there's flames on his hand, as Izuku immediately starts blitzing around the Nomu and starts cutting it into pieces, because Izuku still doesn't know how to defeat a demon. He doesn't know that he has to cut off the head of the demon to destroy it, or he has to use a Nichiren sword. But I'm gonna say that he can use a Moonlight sword style sword to, defeat this Nomu, okay? So Izuku immediately starts blitzing around the Nomu, starts cutting the Nomu. And the Nomu's taking a decent amount of damage, but since all the quirks that the Nomu has, he's still putting up a fight against Izuku, as Izuku's having a hard time, as this fight continues on for a decent amount of time. As we switch over to the perspective of Bakugo and all the other students, we see that everyone's kind of struggling against all these villains, since all these villains have some sort of enhancement, as no one knows what's wrong with these villains, as these villains seem much more stronger than usual. As Froppy is on the boat and is trying to save herself, as Froppy figures out a way, and Mineta as well, they figure out a way. But then, all of a sudden, All Might bursts through the doors of the USJ as he yells that I'm here. As he looks down and sees Izuku still fighting the Nomu. As he sees Izuku fighting the Nomu, but all of a sudden, Izuku passes out from using sun breathing for so long. As All Might knows what he has to do, he immediately blitzed down toward the Nomu. And since Izuku did a ton of damage to the Nomu, I'm gonna say it only takes, All Might around 150 punches to take care of this Nomu. As he immediately starts punching the Nomu, as Shigaraki knows that he can't fight all these, heroes, and since All Might's here, he knows that he can't do much as well. As he starts retreating through the portal, as Kirigiri also starts telling everyone that they better retreat. As everyone and all the villains start to retreat, All Might defeats the Nomu as he punches the Nomu up into the air. As everyone's alright, as All Might picks up Izuku. But then all of a sudden, steam starts to come off of All Might. As All Might knows what he has to do, he blitzes out of the USJ and goes back to the infirmary, still carrying Izuku. As Izuku wakes up, he sees his classmates surrounding him, as his classmates are still amazed at how powerful Izuku really is. As Inosuke just looks at Izuku and frowns, saying that he probably could have taken care of that Nomu as well. As Izuku smiles, telling Inosuke that he probably should have then. As everyone starts chuckling around, as All Might tells Izuku that was dangerous and he shouldn't have been so reckless. as Izuku apologizes to All Might, as everything starts to go back to normal. But when they go outside to go home, all the reporters start to surround them and starts asking them questions. As Izuku doesn't want to tell them about demons to, not to harm human society, and just doesn't tell anyone about it. But Izuku goes to his grandfather again that day. As he goes to his grandfather and tells him what happened. As his grandfather's astonished and tells Izuku that they should keep them to themselves, and tells the underground secret demon corps to make sure that they can take care of all the new demons that appear. As Izuku's confused what his grandfather means, as his grandfather smirks and tells Izuku to come to his house the next day. As he comes to Izuku goes to his grandfather's house. His grandfather takes Izuku to a secret place, as all of a sudden he sees all these new demon slayers and all these people holding swords, as he notices Inosuke and his grandfather, who looks pretty similar to Inosuke as well. As all of a sudden Inosuke looks at Izuku and tells him that they're gonna be fighting a lot of demons. As Izuku's confused, as he notices that there's also some heroes in this as well. As Izuku asks what's going on, as his grandfather smirks, telling Izuku that they're going to be starting a new Demon Slayer Corps. As Izuku smirks, knowing that this is going to be hard, and know that the new demons have to be defeated. As Izuku, starts training and makes sure that he's on top of his game. As he goes to the school the next day, Aizawa tells everyone that basically there's going to be a sports festival and everyone probably should get ready. And that everyone gets a few weeks off to go train themselves up so they can fight in the sports festival. And I'm gonna say that Izuku blitzed through the sports festival. Since Izuku is still extremely powerful, and Izuku could have taken on the Nomu by himself, except for his sunbreathing if he didn't have that drain. So I'm gonna say that this what if ends around here. There's no point in going on with this what if, since Izuku is pretty overpowered right now. He could probably take on Overhaul or basically any of the other villains, even One for All if he wanted to. Since he's so overpowered, and most of his thing is not from his quirk and actually from the forms, I'm gonna say that Izuku's extremely powerful. So that's where we're gonna be ending off this what if and this what if series. And again, if you guys like this what if, don't forget to like, comment, and share. Hit that sub button. And there's also another thing. Since we hit 2K, there's gonna have to be a 2K special. So I want you guys to join the Discord and go down to the the what if section and the what if ideas and post some of your what if ideas down in the description. If you guys can give me a good idea and you guys start voting on them, that's what our 2K special is gonna be. If there's no other further questions, this is where I'm gonna be ending off the video, and I'll see you guys later.